Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I walked up to a small wooden podium in front of a circle of chairs. I've always hated public speaking, ever since I was in elementary school speech classes. My knees were shaking and I was afraid my voice would break. After looking around at 12.5 sitting men, I took a deep breath to calm down and started. Hello, my name is Gary, I said by way of introduction. After a short pause to catch my breath, I continued. And I'm a cuckold. I waited for at least 20 seconds, watching the audience's reaction. Most seemed startled by my statement, their expressions ranging from disbelief to just a blank stare, but not a single man smirked at my initial self-deprecating confession. Well, not really, but the fact that I have this brand on me infuriates me to the point of impossibility. This is my second meeting, and I've listened to half a dozen of your stories, so I decided to share mine. Unlike most of you, I'm still married. My lawyer advised me to get anger management counseling while we work on my divorce case, and I line up my ducks in a row. So far, it seems to be helping. At least I haven't killed anyone yet. This was met with smiles and quiet laughter. Before all this started, I didn't consider myself a trusting person. I didn't realize that I was unobservant, I suggested. I sincerely considered myself a loving husband and hoping that I would soon become a proud father. I've never considered myself a victim. I also never considered myself a loser. I've never been at the top of anything I've done, but I wasn't among the losers or those who came close to it. In high school, I was in the first third of my class in academic performance. It was the same in college. I graduated from college with an average grade of 3.4, which was more than enough for admission to graduate school, where, again, I did well working as an accountant. Upon graduation, with a little more experience behind me, I got a good job as a CPA, licensed accounting specialist, trans, and thought I was on a solid path to success. Then the carpet was pulled out from under my feet. Academic and then financial success is one thing, but when something that defines your essence is ripped out of you, it's the worst thing a person can face, I said. When your wife tells you that you are not good enough for her, well, maybe not directly or verbally, but rather in practice, it is destructive. I started hyperventilating. I grabbed onto this little podium and held onto it like a life raft in a stormy sea. I'm sorry, I got a little off target, I said, regrouping. Two men in the front row gave me a thumbs up and nodded to indicate that they understood me and that I could continue. Let me look back, I said. I'm not going to start telling you what a beautiful wife I have, what big breasts she has and all that. I'm not going to describe our life and claim that it was super hot. I will say that we were active in bed and seemed to have a great life outside the bedroom. She was my best friend and life partner, or so I thought. Ava and I met in college a semester before I got my bachelor's degree. Everything worked out for us, and the following summer we got married. I immediately got a decent job as an accountant to be able to pay for her education. Then, after a year of work experience, which I needed, I got a CPA degree, and Eva became a paralegal. Recently, she announced her desire to go to law school. I snorted. Good luck to her with that. I won't pay for it. This caused a few laughs from the audience. With 2 college loans, we didn't have kids or even buy a house until we both felt we could afford the expenses, I said. Last year, after 5 years of marriage, we bought an old 4-bedroom house and I completely remodeled it. I gutted the interior to the ground and even changed the floor plan to suit us. I turned it into what Eva and I envisioned as our future home. My older brother is a contractor who specializes in rebuilding old houses and turning them into a dream that his clients see. I worked for him every summer while I was in school, so I felt like I had the skills I needed to gut the house and rebuild it so that it would be the best. My brother helped me when I started, and even persuaded his subcontractors to give me special rates for those jobs that were not within my competence. Of course, some of these contractors were already my accounting clients, so part of the job was a quid pro quo. In other words, I don't have much money associated with the house itself, but if I sold it now, its value would be 3 times what we invested in it. Eva got the house of her dreams and seemed excited and satisfied. 6 months ago, she announced that she was ready to get pregnant, and it was only 2 months before she announced that she had a baby. I should be over the moon, and at first I was. The fact is that the child is not mine, or at least I'm pretty sure it's not mine, and at the moment, I sincerely hope I'm right, I confessed. I don't know exactly how long my wife cheated on me, but looking back, I suspect that for most of the last year, at least from time to time. She had plenty of time for cheating while I worked hard, working as an accountant and repairing in the evenings and on weekends our future home. Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering how I found out about Ava's adventures. I got a few nods. Nothing like some of you. No late nights, quick showers when a woman came home, men's underwear under the bed, or anything like that. It all started with a simple phone call. I overheard her talking to someone on the phone when she was in the bedroom and thought she was alone. They were talking with someone about what they needed to pack for an upcoming business trip. When I heard Eva's voice, I assumed she was talking to a woman. No, I still haven't passed the tests. I'm a little worried that it might be Doug's baby. Besides, Gary was coming home too late at night and too tired to really use me the way I wanted to. I was in my most fertile time. I saw a row of smirks all over the room. Okay, I know some of you think I made it all up, that I couldn't remember the conversation with such details, especially if I was upset. But I've listened to this conversation dozens of times over the last few weeks. I recorded it on my mobile phone, I said. I saw several people nod and their expressions change from obvious skepticism to agreement. I asked for help from a security specialist that my brother uses. He installed a couple of cameras and recording devices and provided several that I could put in her purse and briefcase. While I was at work, I spotted her making love in my bed several times and got some interesting audio conversations. She makes love to both her boss and her secretary, often at the same time. The secretary is married and has a couple of children. As far as I understand, they make love in threesomes when they can, and the boss often makes love to one or the other woman at work. Sometimes women play. It's amazing how they work it all, apparently. I want to tell you about one thing that the doc asked me to do. He asked me to try to get inside Eva's head so that I could understand her motivation to go beyond our marriage for the sake of bed. Perhaps she was upset by our long separation and needed physical and emotional contact to make up for it. Well, I'll tell you the same thing I told him. I don't care. She changed it, just like that. If she felt lonely or horny, she could easily have said something, asked for a little more time for us, but she didn't. She decided to go and make love. The reason is controversial. Okay, that's about all I have. Thank you for letting me talk. Right now, I'm in the process of divorcing this fool. This morning, she left for another meeting outside the city with some corporate client. And yes, the boss and the secretary are coming too. I have finished my speech. No sooner had I moved away from the podium than one of the men, a big burly man, spoke. Why didn't you go and stomp on that guy's ass? Of course, I have no idea who did it since I wasn't there and I have a good alibi. But the guy who used my ex had his jaw broken and his balls trampled. No one saw anything. A random attack, according to the cops. There was laughter all around. I told them that I hadn't even met my future ex-wife yet. I still had plans. They looked at me incredulously. The main reason why I attend these meetings at all is to control my anger. Oh, I can say that I imagined using a baseball bat or even putting a few bullets in Doug's ass, but I'm not going to risk jail. And all this macho nonsense about me having to stand up and fight for my woman like a man, it's simple. Nonsense. She's not my woman if she doesn't want to act like that. I haven't touched her since the night I overheard this conversation, I said. I got a COVID. That evening I tested positive and have been sleeping in the guest room in quarantine ever since. In fact, I may have a record for a positive test. In 3 weeks. Actually, I looked on the internet, and it says that in some cases I can be positive for a month, and considering pregnancy, it's just safer for me to sleep in another room. I grinned. I got a few smiles and a thumbs up. A few guys said they would use her and make it hurt. I walked away from the podium. The leader of the group, a therapist, came forward and thanked me for my honesty and frankness. He asked me to keep coming to open meetings as well as to our private consultations. I told him I'd think about it. I may need to let off steam later, but for now, the lion is being kept in a cage. I am here only at the insistence of my lawyer. My lawyer said I was on the verge of breaking down and needed a relief valve. Plans to divorce Eva alone weren't enough to temper my anger. Unlike Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, these meetings ended with everyone drinking. We all went to a bar in the next block. So you didn't even tell that fool that you knew she was cheating? One guy asked incredulously. I shook my head. Damn, I exploded, slapped my wife in the face, and then kicked that asshole out the door. Of course, she told me she was going on a date with a guy when he followed her through the door. He was standing there grinning when she told me she was leaving and probably wouldn't be back until the next morning. If he hadn't been so damn fast, I could have killed him. I was kicking down his car door trying to get to him when the police arrived. That's why I go to these meetings, by court order, to deal with anger. What about these other guys? I asked. Are they in the same boat? The reason I'm asking is that some people seem to like listening to my story. I wonder if there are those among them who have come for prospects. The guy looked at me blankly and asked, Prospects? Yes, like in the old joke. A teenager goes to confession and confesses that he had a bed with a girl at school. The priest asks if it was Mary. The teenager replies that he does not. The priest asks if it was Susie. Again, no. The priest asks about the third girl, Joanna. Again, no. Then the priest tells the child to say 10 Hail Marys. The guy goes outside, and his friend, who was waiting, asks him what the priest said. The first one says, he told me to say 10 Hail Marys and gave me 3 good prospects. The other guys at the table laughed. Looks like you're a good guy, one guy said. If you want someone to kick some ass later while you're in church in front of a bunch of witnesses, let me know. I asked him how he knew I wasn't the cop who was setting him up. Because I sometimes work for your brother as a subcontractor. I remember seeing you at work a while ago. You probably won't recognize me because I used to have a big beard and long hair. Too conspicuous, if you know what I mean. I made a mental note to ask my brother about this guy's story sometime, and I told him that I was just putting everything together as my lawyer advised. Then I'll ask you to serve the fool and continue. I limited myself to 2 bottles of beer. I was surprised how much better I felt when I was driving home. Maybe there really is something in this that allows people, even complete strangers, to know about your problems. Confessing or letting out your demons can be good for the soul, but I had a job to do. I was on a mission. As I told the guys at the meeting, my future ex-wife is away for a week with her boss and secretary, June. They plan to be away all week to meet with some corporate client. I suspect that the work will be completed in 2 days. I knew it was a farce, and I knew what they were up to long before I was told that they could stay to attend a jazz festival next weekend at the company's expense. Eva was going to get some time off, so she would have a few days off next week if I could break away from my ledgers to spend some time with us. I knew it was complete nonsense. She was just trying to keep me in a state of satiation and oblivion. 2 weeks later, I entered the meeting room a little late. The others had already taken their seats, and the therapist was trying to start the meeting by saying that it was better to verbally release your inner demons than to physically spill out and risk criminal or civil consequences. I didn't try to stand out, but as soon as I entered, the hall burst into cheers. Glad you're back, Gary. I know that these guys want to hear the continuation of the story coming from the author himself, my therapist announced. Okay, I said, grinning, expressing a happiness I didn't feel inside. However, at the moment, I was satisfied. I walked up to the podium. A couple of weeks ago, I told you my story about grief, about how my wife cheated on me with her boss, maybe even got pregnant by him. Moreover, the lawyer's secretary was also involved in this, and all 3 of them obviously enjoyed threesome love whenever possible. Well, today I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. When I told you guys about what I knew, I didn't tell this asshole's wife or the husband of another fool anything of what I learned. Not that they didn't deserve to know, but I didn't want them to overreact and disrupt my plans. So I waited until Thursday evening of that week before telling any of them about what our spouses were doing while they were away. I apologized for the delay and explained the reason, and then told them that I was going to ask to serve Eva with a summons at the airport when they returned on Sunday afternoon. Then I suggested that they contact lawyers and gave them the name of my lawyer, and he asked them not to call or write to their spouses and not to tell them that they had been caught. When the initial shock wore off a bit, we started talking. I found out that, as in my case, each of the cheaters called home every night and said how much he missed them and would like to be home. We all knew that we were being fed all sorts of nonsense. At my insistence, Janice, Doug's wife, decided to take her children to visit her sister and brother in Alexandria. She was going to confide in them and ask them to come back and be with her when she ran into her husband after his return. Obviously, this wasn't the first time he cheated. She has 2 teenage children whom she also had to tinker with. Bill, the secretary's husband, couldn't get off work for the weekend. He runs the maintenance department at the Ford dealership in this city. He promised not to call his wife June. He said he wanted to strangle her to death without witnesses. I told him about this group and how it helped me suppress the same impulses. I laughed a little. In general, I told both of them what I had done with my finances and explained why, removing half of our savings and current account balances, etc. In my case, it wasn't much, but they admitted that each of them had a lot of money in their accounts. I told them I wasn't going to cancel my credit cards until the last minute, but would pay the bill from the shared account to make sure my wife paid her half. Leaving them to think about what they need to do, I went home. I'm sure you guys have heard what I've done in my house, and it's all true. I was applauded. I made a half bow. Yes, I spent a week dismantling my house. By dismantling, I mean that I took it apart but did not damage any objects. Some of you may remember from my previous explanation that I did most of the house renovation work myself, with a little help from my brother. What I did was bring this job back. I swapped her places. I had to leave the sheetrock with texture and paint. But this, the carpet, and the air conditioning system are almost all that I left untouched. I disconnected all the appliances and moved them away from the wall. The stove, dishwasher, refrigerator were unplugged, and even the wiring harnesses were removed. Each part was neatly packaged in a bag and attached to the device. I even took out the garbage chute and left it in the middle of the kitchen floor, and disassembled the sink and taps and removed them. I decided to leave the kitchen cabinets. I could take them apart and took apart a few that the two of us were able to lift easily after loosening the mounting bolts. But it was just to show the future ex her beautiful kitchen. I also left the kitchen counters alone, as I used a complete system that I couldn't tear off the wall without damage. In the bathrooms, it was different. I drained the water and removed the toilets, disassembled the baths, even removing the faucet handles again. We even cleaned the edges of the bathtubs and sinks to remove the plaster and sealant. When we finished, everything looked like a pile of used plumbing. Only a few bare pipes and severed valves protruded from the walls. The jacuzzi and shower stall were left untouched, for the same reason that I left the kitchen tables. Then I disassembled the bed and chest of drawers as much as possible. Everything was simple with the bed. The mattress, springs, and everything else were easily disassembled and folded in the hallway. All I could do with the chest of drawers was empty it. All of my wife's clothes were put away in the closet in our bedroom, which, of course, no longer had beautiful louvered doors. Our furniture looked good, and in fact was very expensive, but like many other pieces of furniture these days, it was hastily assembled. We bought most of the furniture disassembled. I've sorted out everything that was originally there. My wife didn't lift a finger to help collect them. The shelves lay in pieces on the floor. The chest of drawers that held my booze and all my wife's knickknacks was ruined, and all the fittings were neatly packed. I wanted to make sure nothing was damaged. The ceiling fans and light fixtures from each room were the last to be removed. The only thing I left was the chandelier in the dining room, but I took the light bulbs out of it. Oh yes, I took off all the switches and sockets in the house. We fixed the wires, although the electricity was turned off. I had to sign a contract to install an air conditioning system, so I left it alone. I installed the water heater myself, but I left it untouched. Now you're probably wondering what I did with all the things I pulled out of cupboards, shelves, and walls. Well, I don't want any of these things, as they will remind me of the fool. So we laid them out on the bedroom floor. I mean, every plate, every glass, every little statuette was neatly arranged from the front of the closet to the door. You couldn't walk from the door to the closet without clearing the way first. Well, I take it back, because the door was no longer there. There were no doors except for the exterior ones, which I left in place for safety. I have already explained that I am an accountant, so I saved the receipts for everything we bought for this house. My wife and I paid for it from our shared budget, so I was going to return half of these appliances and fixtures to her. Only without a job or what I called the sweaty capital I invested in the house. My wife has done almost nothing except choosing the equipment and helping with the planning of repairs. I will want several mobile devices such as a coffee pot, microwave, and the like. This will give my ex a reason to argue. I got a few appreciative laughs. By the time her plane landed at the airport, everything I had assembled or installed in the house had been disassembled. I got a call from the bailiff who handed her the divorce papers, and I sat down to wait for her to come home. June, the secretary, drove them to the airport in her van and dropped them off. My brother and I were waiting with a couple of neighbors who wanted to see the continuation of the show. They watched me take the house apart all week and could confirm where I was and what I was doing. While waiting for the scammers to return home, we devoured the contents of my liquor cabinet and ate steaks from the freezer, which I kept for myself. All other products were taken to Eva's mother's house at the beginning of the week. I told her that my freezer was out of order, but that didn't explain all the canned food and seasonings that I had delivered. The poor woman was too confused to ask what was going on. I knew she'd find out soon enough. June only stayed here long enough to let Ava and Doug out of the van. I wonder why Doug came home with her at all. I walked forward, leaving the others to watch from the side of the house as Eva got out of the van, followed by Doug, her lover. Both were ready to be perceived together. She was shouting, waving the envelope that had been given to her. He was furious, demanded to know what lies I could tell his wife, and said that he was going to bury me according to the law for slandering his character. I filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery and listed him as one of the parties. As you all know, the courts don't really care about the reason for the divorce, but my statement about adultery has shed new light on this problem. Or rather, it added a bit of awkwardness because it became part of the public story. Around the same time, Doug's wife arrived with her sister. I knew Eva's arrival time because I was tracking her cell phone, so I called Janice and informed her that they were on their way. Janice has already called me to tell me some of what she discovered when she returned home after a weekend away. She asked if I was at her house that weekend. I honestly told her that I worked a lot at home and hardly went anywhere, except to my brother's to sleep at night. Apparently, she couldn't park in her garage when she got home. The entire driveway was littered with car parts. Not just parts, but parts that were her husband's beloved '65 Ford Mustang. It was his pride and joy, and he boastfully showed it to every visitor to his house. This car originally belonged to his father and was Doug's first car. She had great sentimental value for him. His father gave it away for safekeeping. Years later, Doug completely rebuilt the car. I've heard people laugh and say that he loves this Mustang more than his wife and kids. Perhaps this was an exaggeration, but not by much. Of course, Doug was a little upset when he saw his wife drive up, and immediately began with an unconvincing comment that everything she could hear was a complete lie. She didn't tell him she was waiting for him at home. We all stood outside while my wife carried the suitcase into the house. Then a scream came from there. Ava rushed to the door, screaming, "What the hell did you do to my house?" I knew she didn't have time to really look around. All she saw were the things piled up in the living room. Surprisingly, she did not notice the absence of blinds and curtains even before she entered the house. I think she was a little out of her mind after she was served at the airport. All the windows were open, as one of my first actions was to remove the blinds, disassemble them, and fold the curtains. When I turned off the electricity, the only light we had was outside during the day or from the generator we were using. I went inside, followed by my brother and the rest of my entourage. In a calm tone, I informed my ex of what I had done. I was preparing the house for the division of our property, 50-50. She demanded to know where her things were. Running my hand along the floor, I said that if she meant clothes and personal belongings, then they were all safe and sound in the closet in the bedroom. When she went to look, she was very unhappy. I've never heard her scream so shrilly in all the years we've known each other. Someone called the police and they came to listen to my wife screaming and screaming that I had destroyed her house. I carefully explained what was going on to the first policeman who arrived at the scene. He immediately called his boss. I don't know what exactly he said, but within a minute at least 3 more units appeared. I called my lawyer when I found out that Ava was already on her way home, and he finally showed up. He apologized, saying he thought he'd better change his clothes before coming. Ava started ranting about where she would go for the night and demanded that I be arrested. My lawyer dismissed the idea, telling the police that I had done nothing illegal. No crime has been committed, and that this is a civil court case. Doug demanded that his wife take him home, but Janice refused, and then frowned and asked why he hadn't looked at his phone. She texted him a few hours before. He still wasn't looking, thinking that everything she sent him had to do with his alleged infidelity. For my part, this is an assumption. He told his wife that he was busy after Ava was served at the airport, and he had to clear up all the misunderstandings related to business trips. At this point, I was trying to keep track of 3 or 4 conversations at the same time. I answered Ava when she asked what I had done with her car. She and Doug decided that she would take him where he needed to go, since his wife said he could walk since she wasn't going to let his crooked ass get in her car. I honestly told Ava that her car was where she left it, in the garage. She stormed back into the house. Less than 2 minutes later, she went outside again and complained that the garage door wouldn't open. I told her that I was not surprised, since the electricity was turned off. And besides, I dismantled the garage door opener. She loudly demanded to know how to get the car out. Doug heard her and told her that she just needed to pull the emergency release to open the door. She had no idea what it was, So he went inside with her. They went back out, and he demanded to know where the unlock handle was. I shrugged my shoulders and told him that she was somewhere nearby, carefully marked, like all the other items I was sorting out. The police have been taking notes all this time, asking for statements from everyone. Janice then reported that she hadn't called the police yet, but she had a problem at home. She showed her mobile phone to the police lieutenant who seemed to be in charge. I saw his face change to complete bewilderment. He looked at me. I told him that Janice showed me the photos, but I was here at my house all weekend and I had numerous witnesses. Unable to get the car out, and Janice refused to take Doug home. They called June again. She arrived disheveled and in tears. Her husband met her at the house with all her clothes packed in plastic garbage bags. He helped her load the bags into the van and told her to leave and not come back until she met with a lawyer. He told me about his plans the day before. Now Eva and Doug were packing their suitcases into June's van. Janice told him once again that he should look at his phone. He finally did it, and then burst into a scream that almost matched Eva's. He shouted to June to take him home as soon as possible. I gave Janice some advice when she first called me to tell me what she had found, and she had already acted on it. Her son-in-law stayed at her house. The cops are done with what they could have done in my house. We all testified, and my brother and I followed the others to Doug's house. A television news van was already parked in front of his house. The reporter interviewed Brett, the brother-in-law, about what the family discovered when they brought Janice home after the weekend. Later I found out that the cameraman had already taken a full video of the area. Brett said that they could not drive up to the house to park in the garage, as the garage gates and most of the road were littered with car parts. The garage was at the end of the house, and this area was completely hidden from view. No one stopped me from following them all the way home. The scene was magnificent. I'm sure most of you men collected car models when you were kids. What I saw was similar to what you see when you open the box with the model, except for the plastic rods holding the small parts. In the center of the circle, there was a car chassis. There were doors on each side. There was a trunk behind the car, in a circle, and a hood in front. I was a little surprised that the wings were not removed. The windshield was not removed either. However, almost all other details have been removed. The engine was in front of the chassis. The radiator, fan, water pump, starter, alternator, carburetor, and all major parts were removed. All the belts and hoses were neatly stacked in rows to one side. The transmission and the entire transmission were located behind the car. The wheels were removed along with the brakes. Even the seats had been removed and were lying to the side. I'm telling you, it was impressive. I have never seen a car completely or almost completely disassembled. Everything was laid out very neatly. Not that it made any difference. Doug lost his temper. He began to wail and even cry. He fell to his knees and screamed that Sally had been destroyed. I asked Janice, who was Sally? The TV reporter was standing nearby, and the police were walking around the car examining the scene. I can say that I burst out laughing when Janice explained that Doug named his car Sally. Mustang Sally, as in the song. I know you've all heard about this part. As soon as the news reporter broadcast her report, the story was picked up by the TV channel and then spread on social media. As a background, they included the song Mustang Sally. None of us spouses were hiding. We all tried to name the three cheaters. Doug accused each of us of damaging his car, but we all had ironclad alibis. June's husband, Bill, worked all day Saturday at the dealership and was with their children that evening and all day Sunday. He had experience disassembling the car and possibly resources, but investigators were unable to connect him to anyone who could be responsible. Apart from Doug's fingerprints, not a single fingerprint was found on any part. The police even checked the mounting nuts, which were neatly stacked in a pile. Janice spent the weekend with her sister and brother-in-law, as even her children testified. She loudly stated that she did not even think about doing anything with the car, and if she did, it would only be with a sledgehammer. And she was still thinking about using a sledgehammer to finish the parts and finish the job. Even the police laughed when they heard that. Of course, because the car was disassembled neatly and the parts were not damaged, I was suspect number one. But I had an alibi too. First of all, I'm not a mechanic. I know what home renovation and renovation is, not how to assemble a car. Anyway, I didn't have more than a couple of screwdrivers and a few wrenches. Besides, I was busy dismantling my house, under the cheerful and attentive gazes of the neighbors. Everything that happened in Doug's house was a circus. Eva was there because she had no other transportation than June. who was kicked out of the house by her husband. My father-in-law showed up soon after receiving a call from Ava. He stood wide-eyed, watching the extravaganza unfold. The reporter called me the next day. She had heard what I had done to my house and wanted to add it to her article. I gave her one of the 20 or so flash drives on which I recorded how I systematically dismantled my house. She compressed 5 hours of video into a 2-minute television segment. These flash drives are still saving my ass. I handed them out like Halloween candy. Of course, since I had only 20 flash drives, I included in them the evidence of the betrayal of the 3 perpetrators. Doug got a restraining order from me not to publish anything about his infidelity. But by the time the order was issued, almost all of these flash drives were distributed. I couldn't control when some of the evidence, including discussions of their affair and even videos of several of their meetings, got online. Even my father-in-law got a flash drive when he asked me if I was overreacting to alleged events. Doug was completely embarrassed to be seen changing places with his 2 female partners. It was cut from a TV segment but appeared on the internet. The fact that all 3 were filmed during the crime was mentioned often, even on television. As of today, my status is still in limbo. I intend to insist that the divorce be finalized as soon as possible, but Ava wants to stay married for the sake of the child. The paternity test, which my wife initially protested against, showed that I was not the father of her unborn child. I had to pay extra to have the test accelerated, but since the child is not mine, I will get some of my money back from the general assets. Ava wanted to be able to discuss this issue privately and wait for the birth of the child to take the test, but I made it so public that she had no choice but to agree to the test, despite the advice of her lawyer. I have no idea what she's planning to do or if Doug will step up. He may not even be a father, as far as I know. It's not my concern. My wife found a lawyer who claimed that I destroyed my house. Mine, of course, claimed that I just took away my work. None of the components were damaged, and everything is ready for resale. As far as I've heard, the investigation of who dismantled Doug's Mustang has not yielded any results. The working theory says that it should be a team of experienced mechanics, someone with the experience to remove the main components and not leave behind a complete mess. The oil, transmission fluid, coolant, and even brake fluid were drained, and none of the parts were damaged during disassembly. Even Bill, June's husband, told the investigators what needed to be done to take the car apart like that. Components that could have been damaged during disassembly, such as manifold covers and valve assemblies, were left alone. Bill told me in private that he would like to hire these people because they were fast and clearly knew their stuff. He told me that no matter how much he liked it, he had nothing to do with the dismantling of the Mustang, and asked if I had anything to do with it. I honestly replied that I didn't. Doug paid exorbitantly to pick up and keep the parts. Janice told him he had 2 days to get this junk, as she called it, out of her way so she could have access to the garage. Otherwise, she'd hire a couple of neighborhood boys to dump all this shit in a pile under the awning where Doug kept the car. He knew she was serious. Before any of you think that I got away with all this, I will say that I did not remain unscathed. The very next day after Eva returned home, I was immediately fired from my job. I knew my boss was a good friend of Doug's. Doug sent him clients, and he, in turn, recommended Doug when the need arose. My boss was even the one who initially suggested Eva go to work for Doug. When I was told that I was fired, I leaned over to my boss's desk and asked him if he had participated in the games, and more specifically, asked if he had used my wife. He denied everything, but that didn't stop me from talking to his wife a little bit to make the assumption I suspected. My former boss's claim that I was poaching clients was rejected when I demonstrated that I had brought many of them to the firm. Several other people said they didn't trust him after he fired me. I agreed to keep all the accounts that followed me on a voluntary basis for 2 months while I worked for my brother for minimum wage. Eva's lawyer claims that I deliberately avoid having a substantial income. I claimed that I was just helping friends while I was deciding on my future career. So I opened my startup accounting firm on a voluntary basis in an unused office in my brother's building. If any of you need an accountant, let me know. The audience applauded me several times. I felt a little better in my circumstances, but I had to admit that I had lost my wife, my home, and my dreams. Everything is irrevocable. 3 weeks later, I joined the anger management support group again, which some of us dubbed Cuckold Anonymous. I walked up to the podium. I see a lot of similar faces here. I think you're here for the same reason I am. It's hard to control your emotions. Let me rephrase. It's hard to keep them under control all the time. As my therapist, and I'm sure your therapists say, it's a fine line between depression and anger. I'm talking to both therapists right now. To be honest, it wasn't my choice. I know that some of you had to come here because it was ordered by the court. I'm here because my sister-in-law demanded it. We were all sitting at the dinner table and my 8-year-old nephew asked loudly, "Uncle Gary, are you angry all the time because Aunt Eva was such a fool?" Well, angry and stupid are the key words for my daughter-in-law. When asked where he heard it, my nephew pointed at me and said he heard me talking to his father. My sister-in-law looked at me to fix the situation, so I said very carefully that using the word fool was not very polite. But yes, I was very upset about Aunt Eva. And then I got into the top 3 keywords when he said, "Okay, I won't say that anymore. I like her. It's a pity that she's rubbish." Can you imagine the looks my sister-in-law gave me? My brother didn't help at all. He just stared at his plate and shook, trying not to laugh. My sister-in-law told me very quickly that if I wanted to keep my boys, I'd better learn to watch what I say when surrounded by children. Now my 6-year-old niece stepped in and said, "Boys, I didn't know Uncle Gary had kids. Where are they?" My sister-in-law said that the boys are me, her father and brother. Then the 6-year-old, bless her heart, said, "Oh, so when you told Miss Sandy that your girls were hurting and very sensitive from playing too rough, you meant that I fell and skinned my knee when..." To be honest, I didn't hear her. I finished because I was laughing too hard. But my sister-in-law was beet red. "Okay, in short, if I want to live with my brother and his family, I will continue therapy, including these group classes," I announced. "I can't afford to live on my own. I don't have any income right now. I wanted to reduce what I earned from the divorce, but people don't understand how difficult it is even to find an apartment without a confirmed income. My sister-in-law is a wonderful woman and generous beyond measure. She just doesn't want my misfortunes to have a negative impact on her children." Here are some more keywords in addition to the ones I mentioned. So, what do we have? Except that I upset my daughter-in-law by having her children eavesdrop on my conversations. Over the past 3 weeks, I have done the minimum in terms of earnings. Before I was fired, I earned only a little more than Ava. Personally, it seemed to me that she was paid so much because she provided her boss with additional services. Of course, my lawyer told me to keep my mouth shut about this, since our meager income difference means I won't be paying child support. He told me not to mess it up. Janice kicked Doug out and filed for divorce. His favorite car, the Sally, is in a warehouse somewhere. Their divorce, as you can imagine, is already messed up. She told me bluntly that she was looking for any way to strip the meat from the bastard's bones. I know she meant metaphorically, but I hope that I will never be called to testify if something happens to this person physically. Doug has big problems at work. He mainly works with corporate clients. Someone started a rumor that maybe some of his negotiations were sweetened by services from Eva and June. All 3, of course, categorically deny this, but apparently some customers have taken this opportunity seriously and are moving the business to another location. The company as a whole had some problems in other areas. They dealt with discrimination and harassment cases. Some of these clients have changed lawyers and filed complaints with the Bar Association, saying that the firm cannot handle its internal affairs when it comes to making love in the workplace. I understand that Doug's continued presence is more of a burden than an advantage, and he is close to being asked to leave. His situation at work is aggravated by the fact that a lot of people drive past his office playing Wilson Pickett's Mustang Sally at full volume. With a good guy, this can't happen. I hate it. But, while I like the idea that he might be out of a job, Eva's income could plummet. Her income is very high compared to the average salary for a couple of lawyers, especially given her short term in this field. Again, it is suspected that part of her salary is a service fee. That's what they said about June's secretary. Of the 3 cheaters, June is the only one who can save her marriage. She's struggling to come to terms. She just liked the power she felt. She claimed that she never allowed Doug to use her. She also claimed that Eva was submissive and fell on her on command, and June liked to use this power. She admitted that although it was mostly one-sided, she liked to make love between girls sometimes. She's playing the child custody card with all her might. Bill told me that he was considering saving their marriage if she agreed to a prenuptial agreement. She convinced him that the rumors about making love to clients were lies. My marriage, on the other hand, is over. I wouldn't have left her if the baby was mine. All we have to do is divide the property. The judges, and I use this term in the plural since Eva appealed the original decision, said that I have the right to take my own sweat invested in my former home. I did not damage any components, but simply uninstalled them and left them ready for reinstallation or sale. I gave Eva ownership of everything that I had placed in our bedroom, but she had to pay the bill for packing and removing it all immediately. Otherwise, I would consider it common property. Her father helped her pay and coordinate it. I wanted to get my things out of the house as soon as possible, but I refused to lift a finger to help. Eva tried to get me to help so we could talk. I refused to talk to her without my lawyer present. My sister-in-law went to observe and make sure that Eva only took things from the bedroom. My future ex-father-in-law finally looked through the files I gave him and told me in private that he understood my actions, but he still had to take care of his daughter. I think Eva went back to her old room in their house. At our first joint meeting with lawyers as part of the division of property, I offered Eva to take her half of household appliances and appliances. She could have chosen what she wanted, and I would have taken something of a similar value. She stared at me when I said I'd give her the right to choose the toilet first. She wanted to buy back my half for face value, saying she would hire a team to put everything back together. I knew what she and her lawyer were thinking. The whole was worth much more than the sum of the parts. As an accountant, I also knew how much I could afford to offer her and still stay below the break-even point. I kept offering more than she did. She wouldn't have been able to get the funding anyway. I couldn't have done it myself either, but my brother supported my game financially. Eva refused to sell to me for any reason. In the end, her lawyer demanded to sell everything at a public auction and split the proceeds. My lawyer weakly objected that we would lose too much. He lost that decision, which didn't bother him or me. Eva tried, but couldn't find a buyer who would offer an amount close to what I was offering. My brother initially offered to buy the shell of the house for half of what my ex and I invested, but was refused. In the end, he bought it at auction for 70%. The house was in excellent condition, but few of the investors were willing to outbid my brother's price. I'm sure some of these investors were interested, but they knew my brother would never work for them again, and other people involved in the trade would follow their example. Eva's lawyer protested briefly against the lack of compensation for his client, but had to admit that the auction was his client's demand, and they unfortunately refused my much higher offer. So, basically, I lost my ass dealing with the divorce issue. Unemployed and with a small percentage of my assets, I still live in my brother's guest room. To compensate him for the rent, I started work on restoring my old house. Everyone knows that I dismantled my house, but no one has the slightest idea who dismantled Doug's beloved Mustang, let alone provide at least some evidence. Doug even hired his own investigators. All the tracks were dry. My financial statements were checked to see if I had paid anyone. I had to give them access to my mobile phone and computer. June's husband, Bill, too. No connection has been found with anyone who could have committed this case. This whole story has become fodder for social media after it originally appeared as a topic on network television. You can imagine the notoriety I got as a man who dismantled his house. I am constantly asked how I actually disassembled the Mustang, and they promise that they will never tell me. And then they congratulate me for something I didn't do. A few guys stood up and immediately congratulated me to the laughter of the others. I walked away from the podium. The therapist asked who wanted to speak next. Everyone shook their heads. One guy said he would wait for the next time to tell how he grabbed the balls of a guy using his wife and took him naked out of the house into the street. We all headed to the bar. The epilogue. "Hey Gary, don't I have the right to a small discount as a new customer?" Paul Fruge asked. He was a drywall subcontractor I met at Cuckold Anonymous. "I think I remember that you gave the guys who followed you when you were fired from another firm 2 months of free accounting service." "Damn, I gave you a free installation of my system," I suggested with a smile. "It takes some time. Do you think you deserve more? You work for my brother, not me. My house already has all the walls." I was referring to my former house, which now belonged to my brother and was rented to me for a minimum amount. "I will buy this house back for the amount my brother paid for it in a year or so, when we consider that enough time has passed so that my ex-wife, Eva, cannot report fraud. Or is it because I offered all the guys from our cuckold group a discount to do their taxes this year?" I asked. "Nah. I think I deserve it for using the jack to lift the Mustang to remove the wheels and transmission. I'm not a great mechanic, but I can put together parts. And also for telling your brother that I know some guys who can help in a bad situation, and especially my cousin, who is a mechanic, when he told me about the Mustang that he wanted to take apart." I could hardly see through the tears of laughter as I marked his bill, fully paid for the following year.